Thanks so much for joining us here today. My name is Ellie Place. I use she, her pronouns, and we are going to be talking about hosting a volunteer vacation. So without further ado, I will go ahead and get started. All right, so first off, I'm going to talk a little bit about volunteer vacations, what the program is, what the impact is, and then share a little bit about some previous hosts and the projects that we have completed in the last year. So first off, what are volunteer vacations? Volunteer vacations are anywhere from 4 to 7 day service projects that accomplish your trail needs that involve building and maintaining hiking trails on public lands. The crew can range anywhere from a minimum to 6 to upwards of 15 to 20 to potentially more depending on your capacity to supervise volunteers. And these projects are always led by either an AHS crew leader and or the host staff. The accommodations on these projects can range based on what you're able to provide the volunteers, from primitive backcountry camping to car camping, which is our most common option. But we also do some accommodations include lodges, cabins, or bunkhouses with modern indoor amenities. These projects are an incredible opportunity for volunteers to gain experience with public land stewardship. It gives the volunteers an opportunity to give back to the trails that they love. They have an opportunity to meet new people and have a great time. But of course, I think one of the most important things is that it also helps us to complete trail maintenance projects across the country. Who does what? So there are kind of 3 key players here. So American Hiking provides project assistance. So we'll basically support these projects by coordinating and organizing the volunteer recruitment for your project using our website, newsletter, email lists, industry events, sponsors, and partners. We also provide the logistical support and communication throughout the trip planning process. We provide a volunteer food stipend and meal to feed the crew throughout the week. And then if requested, we can also provide a volunteer crew leader who will aid in the menu planning, food shopping, crew communications, social leadership, and lodging logistics. The volunteers, they provide the volunteer labor and often very eager and enthusiastic attitudes. They'll also provide their own camping gear and hiking gear and whatever personal gear they need to complete the project. They will also pay for their own travel to and from a predetermined pickup point, which is usually the closest major airport. Now, the hosts provide the project plan and the scope of basically the plan for the week. So basically, what are your trail needs? The host will come up with the project plan for the volunteers for the week to complete those needs, and then provide technical expertise and full supervision for the volunteers throughout the week, lodging for the volunteers, whether that's cabin, lodge, house, or improved primitive campsite. The host is asked to provide tools and safety equipment, including first aid supplies. The host is asked to provide somewhere for the crew to cook meals throughout the week, whether that's access to an indoor kitchen or an outdoor campsite, including the stove, fuel, pots, pans, utensils, and other items. However, I'll talk more about this, but AHS is able to help support if this is a prohibitive factor for a project. The host is asked to provide transportation to the worksite if hiking back and forth from the lodging is not an option. And then not required, but it's highly recommended that the host provides airport pickup and drop off for volunteers, because that just makes it more accessible for volunteers to travel to and from your location without having to rent a car if they're flying in. All right, one common question that we get are, what are the costs associated with hosting a volunteer vacation? And there are no costs due to American Hiking to host a volunteer vacation. So the only costs associated would be the staffing and supervision of your project and supervising the volunteers throughout the week, providing housing if it's not provided at your location, but often they're happy to camp or stay at the lodging at your location, and then providing any group cooking gear, which AHS will assist with. All right, and what are the impact of volunteer vacations? So since the start of the program, AHS volunteers have contributed over 650,000 hours of service that have helped to build and maintain almost 5,000 miles of trail and topped 11.5 million in volunteer labor value. So these projects can be hugely impactful in helping to complete any backlog trail maintenance needs, or just projects that you don't have the budget or time for, or can't hire a professional crew for. Our volunteers are ready to go and happy to help. So I wanted to share a little bit about some of our previous hosts and what they had to say about hosting a volunteer vacation with American Hiking Society. So Julia from the Tuolumne River Hiking Trails shared that working with AHS was an amazing experience for our organization. Not only did they take the time-consuming logistics regarding volunteer recruitment and coordination off our plate, but they were able to reach a wide demographic and geographic range of individuals through their network that we would not normally be able to connect to. The volunteers who joined us were a joy to work with. They were motivated, positive, and as passionate about the trails as we are. It means so much to us that these folks spent their hard-earned vacation time to contribute to the local efforts to revitalize trails. Thank you, AHS and AHS volunteers. Tony with the Champlain Area Trails shared that volunteer vacationers always bring new energy, perspective, and spirit to our projects. Not only do we get lots done, but we have so much fun doing it. We work, but also laugh, tell stories, and swap experiences. In the end, we all take great pride in the finished product. Katie with Fort Niobrara National Wildlife Refuge shared that the group knew more about the trail design and sustainability than I could have imagined. They have had ideas for making the trail hold up over years instead of just putting a Band-Aid on the problem areas. And then Miguel with the Catalina Island Conservancy shared, our trail maintenance manager, Kevin, expressed that in his 17 years working for the Catalina Conservancy, this was the best group of people he has ever had assisting him in both personality and work ethic. I am the volunteer manager here with the Catalina Conservancy, and all I can say is that I want to join one of these trips one day. So I can't express enough that we always get great feedback from our hosts about our volunteers. They come hardworking and with a lot of experience in trail building. So I don't want it to be underestimated how much work you could get done in a week with a AHS volunteer vacation. So with that, I'm going to talk a little bit more now about designing your trail project, what the scope of that looks like, and then some application tips. So this is just an example of some of the different projects that were completed this year in 2024. However, the scope of the trail maintenance and basically the volunteer work that can be done is ultimately up to the staff. So whatever your trail needs are, whether that's brushing, whether that's constructing a new boardwalk, whether that's repairing some broken down boardwalks, really the scope of what the volunteers can do is pretty big. So we encourage you to submit applications for a wide variety of tasks because we have volunteers that are excited about doing different things. So in Whittier, Alaska, our crew constructed and rerouted a switchback, moved a 1/4 ton of boulders, armored a creek crossing, and built 2 retaining walls. In Kenai National Wildlife Refuge, there was a 160-foot reroute and 156 feet of boardwalk that was removed and rebuilt. In the San Juan Islands National Monument in Washington, the crew brushed 8 miles of trail, blocked in social trails, and removed invasive species from 2 miles of road in the campground. And they also helped to build 1/2 mile of a connector trail. In the Appalachian Hills Wildlife Area, the crew did vegetation control of 15 miles of trail, including mowing, string trimming and lopping, and chainsawing of downed trees. And then in our Big South Fork National River and Recreation Area, the crew removed an old bridge that crossed a creek near a historical home site. And once the old bridge was removed, they rebuilt the bridge with new lumber. And then also helped to build walkways across some wet areas on the trail. So I just want to reiterate that our crews are able to do a variety of tasks. And so basically whatever your trail needs are, I encourage you to submit a project and we can talk with you about what will work well for our volunteers and their skills. All right, so designing your volunteer vacation. What are your trail needs? The one thing that we ask is that since American Hiking is dedicated to protecting foot trails, we ask that your volunteer project should be focused on building or maintaining foot trails on public land. Multi-use trails are fine as long as hiking is one of the uses of that trail. Most crews will have somewhere between 6 to 15 crew members. We like to have our minimum no less than 6 just to foster a positive group environment and give you enough volunteer support to accomplish your project needs. However, we're happy to go between 15 and 20 as the maximum, depending on what you're able to supervise and how many volunteers you're able to house. We can schedule the project for any time during the year. Historically, folks like to travel during the summer and fall. So we like to plan the bulk of our projects when our volunteers are able to travel. But we also want to consider weeks when the weather would be ideal to host a volunteer crew and when your accommodations are available. Are there any seasonal attractions such as fall foliage or spring blossoms? Or is there a wildlife migration, or are there certain birds at your site certain times of the year? Because volunteers really like to travel for also the added benefit of visiting a new place and seeing kind of unique or interesting things throughout the year as well. And if your dates are flexible, you can let us know in the application, and we can kind of work around other projects and place your project at a time of the year when it will be most likely to be successful in recruiting volunteers to meet the minimums. The project itinerary. So most of our projects have volunteers arriving on Sunday evening. They'll work Monday through Friday and then depart on Saturday. So it's a week-long project from Sunday to Saturday. And that first day is used for setting up, getting into accommodations, and no trail work is done on that first day. But then on Monday through Friday on the work days, we like to have Monday start with a thorough safety briefing and tool use demonstration led by the host staff, the project work, and then we like to incorporate at least one day, a full day if possible, if not a half day, for the crew to have completely off, for them to explore the area, go on a hike, rest, relax at camp, get a shower, go into town. Sometimes folks like to go get a dinner in town or something on that day, but we basically like to give at least one day off for the crew to relax. And then, so this year we ran a pilot program of having weekend-long trips where the crew would arrive Thursday, work Friday through Sunday, and then depart Sunday in the afternoon. And this was really successful. We were able to fill all these projects basically up to the capacity, because our volunteers, we just found that it was a really great way for folks who weren't able to take a full week off of work or their home responsibilities to volunteer, but they could volunteer for a longer weekend. So if you have a smaller project that you think might not be or might be completed shorter than a full week, I definitely encourage you to apply and let us know if you're able to host the crew during a long weekend instead of a full week. We advise volunteers to expect about 6 to 8 hours of work on the work days. So you'll basically plan the exact needs of your project once you have the scope of your project laid out. And then the start and end time, the crew leader will work with you to communicate that with the crew. And then please make sure to also factor in any drive or hike times to the project, including the breaks and lunch, which will be eaten on the trail. All right, so a little bit more about when you're putting together your application, it is in your best interest to be as specific as possible in the application and have the exact location and length of the trail that are going to be worked detailed in your application. So if you know the exact number of water bottles that you want to clean or remove, and the exact mileage that you'd like to brush, or if you're going to be installing or removing signs, any of that, the more specific you are, the better we can advertise and recruit volunteers that are interested in the scope of the project work that you have at your location. And one of the most common things that we hear is that our crews are able to complete time in less time than estimated, because we usually just have, I think we have a really great community of enthusiastic volunteers and also volunteers with a lot of previous trail maintenance experience. So we always recommend to have a backup or additional projects planned and ready to implement should you have a stellar crew that can complete it in a shorter amount of time. Some volunteers will gravitate towards a camping trip. Some will consider trips with indoor accommodations. So we welcome a variety of projects with a variety of accommodations. So whatever you have is okay. The one thing that we find is that if a crew doesn't have access to a shower throughout the week, if you're able to provide that at the end of the week or help point them in the right direction, whether that's a community center or gym with a drop-in pass, that's usually appreciated, especially for those backpacking or camping for a week who might have to be flying home. So really the people sitting next to them on the plane will appreciate it more than the crew themselves maybe. But the other thing is that if you're able to provide an airport pickup, that is a huge help in helping us recruit volunteers who then will be traveling from other states to join your project. All right, project type, ratings, and accommodations. So we offered 2 different types of project types. So one of them is day hiking. So these trips are where the crew can basically day hike or drive from the accommodations to the project work site each day. But we also do backpacking trips. So if you have more remote trail needs, we will offer backpacking trips where the crew will backpack into a remote campsite, and then from there travel to the project work site each day. And in these cases, the volunteers will bring their own personal gear, including tent, backpacking, backpack, and then everything they need to be comfortable in the backcountry. And some of these trips, we are able to ask the volunteers to help carry a portion of the food and the tools. But we also will help arrange trips with pack stock or other ways to get the gear into the backcountry. So you're not limited by that if you have some project needs that are a little bit further back there. Accommodations, as I discussed, we can do car camping tent sites, primitive tent sites, and indoor lodging. So basically whatever you're able to provide, we can work with you on making sure the volunteers have access to everything they need throughout the week. Project ratings. So when you submit your application, we ask that you help kind of self-select your project rating. And this ranges from easy to very strenuous. And this basically helps us just advertise your project and then recruit volunteers who are willing and able to complete the project work. And especially if you have a more challenging task that includes more like lifting or heavy rock work or things like that, we're just really clear about that so that our volunteers can select projects that interest them and that they're able to basically have a productive and fun week at. Crew leaders. So AHS is able to provide a volunteer crew leader if you are interested in having additional logistical support. So the crew leader from AHS would serve as a social leader. They'll aid with communication with the crew, help to kind of coordinate a lot of those logistics in advance. They will do the meal planning and preparation if you're not able to provide meals, which most aren't, and that's totally fine. The crew leader will coordinate lodging details, coordinate the crew travel, make sure everyone's arriving at the right spot at the right time, and they will essentially serve as the main point of contact with the crew and the liaison between you, the host staff, and AHS. So although they're usually veterans of the program, they're not always expected to be experts in trail building and design, and so they're not paid for their leadership role. So I do want it to be clear that the crew leader will always look to you, the host, for guidance regarding the project design and the actual scope of the trail work. So the crew leaders are often experienced, but the host is still required to provide full supervision of the crew while on the trail and be the main person designating the scope of the project work, the project plan, and the backup plan. The host will still be the primary responder in the event of an emergency, and the host will still be required to essentially be in the field with the crew, even if there is an HS crew leader. But the crew leader can help take off basically all the other logistical aspects of running the trip and specifically supervising the crew at camp and, kind of after working hours when the host staff go home. Okay, volunteers, travel, and gear. So I'll share a little bit more about our volunteers, what they're prepared to bring, and where they come from. So AHS volunteers basically come from all walks of life and all across the country. Our age range is anywhere from 15 to 80 plus, and the host will determine the minimum age. So if you have a minimum age that you're not allowed to go underneath, that's fine. You can let us know in the application. And typically our policy is that we only allow volunteers under 18 with a parent or legal guardian, if that's allowed by the host staff. And then while many volunteers come with significant trail maintenance experience, there is never any experience required to join a volunteer vacation. So please consider this range when designating your project, because we do want it to be open to everybody and especially new volunteers so that we can continue to engage new generations and new folks in trail work. So we like to ask to have a variety of tasks and always have detailed instruction provided by the host. So yeah, all tool use, instruction, and full supervision needs to be provided during the duration of the project work, regardless of the volunteers and their experience. Volunteers are responsible for their own travel to and from the volunteer vacation, and they usually will meet at either the host site or the nearest airport. Most of our volunteers drive, some of them fly in. I think, during COVID times, we saw a lot more volunteers driving, but I think now we're moving back into a time when a lot more people are feeling comfortable flying again. So we're kind of seeing about half and half, but usually we have maybe like 60% of our volunteers drive to a location, the other 40 might fly. And so that's why if you're able to pick up volunteers at the airport, huge help for those flying in. Otherwise, we can help to arrange carpools, and a lot of times the volunteers will, if someone's driving, they'll be able to pick up a couple folks from the airport as well. Group cooking gear. So the hosts are asked to provide a full set of group cooking gear or access to an indoor area to cook. So that would include stove, fuel, pots, pans, spatulas, any utensils needed for the project, or access to a full kitchen. And then if indoor storage is not available, or if the crew will need bins or bear boxes to keep out any critters, the hosts are asked to provide that, as well as coolers, ice, or access to a refrigerator. However, that all being said, this is usually one of the biggest barriers for new hosts, specifically if you don't have access to an indoor kitchen for the crew. So HS, we do have sets of cooking gear that we can share with you for these projects. There will still be potentially some expense required by the host to help get at least the stove and fuel and coolers and ice and things like that. But we are able to help provide cooking gear as far as like pots, pans, spatulas, and things like that, if that is prohibitive to you. So please don't let this be a reason to not apply. We will work with you on making sure everyone has what they need. All right, a day in the life. So each volunteer vacation will largely depend on your trail project, as well as the location, weather, project rating, and the crew themselves. But a typical day is volunteers waking up and eating breakfast, preparing breakfast for themselves at camp, and then getting ready to be on the trail between 8 to 9 a.m. You can expect about 6 to 8 hours of work each day. Volunteers will pack their own lunches to eat on the trail, and then the crew leader and the host will help to make sure that lots of breaks are being taken throughout the day, that everyone's staying hydrated. Depending on whether the schedule can be adjusted as needed. So if it's going to be really hot in the afternoon, maybe you start a little bit earlier, or if there's rain in the morning, you can start a little bit later. Really, that's up to you guys, but most projects will wrap up in the late afternoon. The crew will hike or travel back to camp and then have the rest of the day to rest and relax and enjoy the area. They'll reconvene for dinner. After dinner, once again, free time. And then we also like to have a full day off where the crew can take a hike, explore the area, and take a tour of local attractions. And one thing that is really, we find really important in attracting volunteers is being able to offer something on the crew's off day, such as a guided hike, a tour. If you have kind of a behind the scenes or like a ranger talk that you're able to provide, those are really, really helpful for volunteers. We just find that volunteers love those kind of experiences, and it really helps to connect them to the place that they're in, the park or the resource area. And then it also just is a really great way to kind of thank the volunteers for their work by kind of giving them this like added benefit of working at your location or host site. Timelines. So we are currently in our application period. So we're now accepting applications through November 1st. Applications will be reviewed and accepted on a rolling basis. So basically, the sooner that you apply, the better chance you have of your project being selected for next year, but we will be reviewing applications up until November 1st. So as you apply, we're going to be reviewing the applications in batches every couple weeks, and then we'll start to reach out to you and discuss the plan and confirm project details. So you'll submit your application, but there's definitely still a process there where we might go back and forth on determining the project plan and making sure that everything's set and ready to go. So I will definitely be in touch with you. It's not an all or nothing application. So just know that as you apply, that we'll definitely work with you on any questions and details throughout the application process. Once the application is accepted, we will post the volunteer vacations on our webpage, and we'll begin to recruit volunteers for your project when we announce our schedule publicly, which we aim to do in mid-November to early December. All right, so that was rapid fire volunteer vacations information. So I want to open it up now to any questions that anyone might have. So like I said, this was recorded. I also can send out links to our volunteer vacations host information webpage, which includes all of the details that were covered in this presentation in a PDF format as well. It's called the host guide. So we also have that resource for you to read through about the different requirements for an application. But yeah, I'll leave this next couple minutes for anyone that might have any questions. And feel free to post them in the chat or just unmute yourselves and ask questions. All right, it looks like Morgan says, if the project doesn't get a minimum of 6 volunteers interested, what will happen? That's a great question. So basically what we do is we will reach out to the project host. Usually we start this process anywhere from 2 to 3 months before the project is going to start. And we share the crew roster, how many people have registered, what their skills are. And then if that number is less than the minimum, we'll basically just ask you and work with you and decide if we'd still like to move forward with the project or if we'll cancel the project. We do everything possible not to cancel any projects. And so a lot of the times, if we don't have enough volunteers, AHS will kind of up our advertisement for that project and do some paid advertisements and advertisements on our social media, as well as our newsletters and email lists. So usually we're able to have enough volunteers to meet the minimums. But for instance, like sometimes we'll have 4 volunteers and their minimum is 6. We'll just ask the host, and if the host is still interested in completing the project with 4 volunteers instead of 6, we'll still move forward with that project. So it's kind of a collaborative decision that we'll make once we get about 2 to 3 months before the project happens. All right, Aaron says, is it possible for lodging to be offsite? And if so, should transport be provided to sites each day? That's a great question. So yes, it is. If you don't have any good access to lodging or a place for the crew to stay at your project work site, it's fine to have the lodging offsite, but in that case, it would be less prohibitive for volunteers if you're able to provide the transportation to the site each day. But if you aren't able to provide transportation, we'll just be clear about that in the project listing on our website, so that volunteers know that when they're signing up. And then usually then we'd probably just have more volunteers sign up who are driving to the project site and would be able to have the car back and forth each day. Yeah, those are great questions. Are there any other questions that I can help with? All right, does airport have to be a large airport or is regional airport okay? That's another great question. Usually there are more options to larger airports, but if it's prohibitive, like if you're not able to drive 3 hours to a larger airport and there's a smaller airport nearby that's 30 minutes away and you can provide airport, that's totally fine. Either one works well. I think that what we usually do is, like, if there's options, like if there's a bigger airport further away, we'll list that in the project site and then also have the option to do a regional airport with transportation or something like that. So we're just clear about the different options for the volunteers so they can kind of self-select. Yeah, Joe says our airports are a couple of hours or more from any sites, making it a burden for us to provide transports. Plus, most people coming here want to visit Yellowstone. Yeah, definitely. So they'd want to rent a car. Would not providing an airport transport be a deal breaker? Absolutely not. Yeah, that's a great question and a really good point, that there are a lot of sites that are not super accessible to airports, and that's okay, especially if there's a big draw like Yellowstone or some other really popular hiking or recreation area nearby. So it just helps us being able to recruit more volunteers, but I definitely say still submit an application even if you're not able to provide airport transfer. Most of the time in those circumstances, AHS might then be able to help coordinate an airport shuttle. Like we do have a small budget for picking up folks if we need it, or we'll just kind of advertise it. We'll just be clear that there is no airport transfer provided, and then volunteers will arrange carpools for those who are flying in. Or the other case is that just we have volunteers that are prepared to provide their own transportation. Yeah, these are all great questions. I'll leave this up for a couple more minutes if anyone has any other questions. Yeah, you're very welcome. All right, so I don't see any more coming in, so I think we'll go ahead and end it there. But thank you all for tuning in. We're really excited to potentially work with new host locations for our volunteer vacations program. So if you have any questions, I'll type my email in here. And feel free to reach out to me directly. I'm happy to talk with anyone one-on-one about their project plan or the scope of their project that they have in mind. We can work together before or after you submit your application. But yeah, I'm really excited to potentially work with you all. So thank you so much for being here, and hopefully we'll be in touch soon.